Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review and another Math Monday. We are back in the swing of things. I'm so excited to get back to reading and have the biggest portion of this move behind me. There's a lot still left to do, but reading is back on the menu, ladies and gentlemen, and I have been doing a lot of reading. So today I'm going to be reviewing the cartoon introduction to statistics. If you saw my library haul short that I did, the older version of this book was in there, but I actually wound up going with the newer version of the book. I believe this is the newer version of the book I showed in that haul short. And that was just because this one was just a little more up to date. That other book, well, perfectly fine, had some out of date things and definitely was acting like computers were a new invention at the time. And this one is a little bit more current. So I decided to read and review this book instead, but the books are probably essentially the same. So this book is definitely for a layperson or someone without any math knowledge and just is designed to give a fun introduction to statistics using cartoons, so again, making this a little bit more accessible to someone and maybe a little bit less scary. I really felt like this was a good introduction. I feel like they were able to cover things in a really meaningful way or a very comprehensible way without getting bogged down in the details. So a little bit of background, I do have my degree, my bachelor's degree in mathematics. So I am a little familiar with statistics, although statistics, I only took a couple courses in statistics versus all the other math classes I took. But I felt like this was a good introduction to someone who didn't have any background and they were able to actually get into some more complex topics I didn't necessarily expect them to get into. So I was deeply impressed by this book. So the first thing that I think the author did a good job in is narrowing into what exactly we're doing with statistics, and that's on this first page here. It is how do we use samples to make confident statements about entire populations. And the whole book is in this cartoon format with clear examples and simple examples that make sense for the average person. Something else that you're not going to see a lot of something you won't see a lot of in this book, I should say, is math symbols. So the authors moved a lot of the math to this area in the back called the math cave, which I thought was really funny. So we have the math cave, and this is for the people who maybe are a little more comfortable with math symbols. They can go in here and actually look at some of the math that we're talking about in the book. And there is references in the main portion of the book and along the side to cross-reference what the math is if you're curious. But in the main section of the book, they kind of stay away from everything except for the most basic of numbers. And I think that was a good choice because some people see math symbols and they freak out. They did not like math in high school. They did the bare minimum they needed to graduate and they haven't thought about it since. But particularly statistics, because they're thrown around so much, I think are so important to understand. And the authors, I think, made this good choice to include the math information for those who wanted it in that math cave in the back. However, they left it out of the main portion of the book so that you don't have to wade through it or overcome that fear if this is something that you don't like looking at per se. So another thing that right off the bat was there was this panel where it said, so whether you're someone who feels comfortable around numbers, and there's two kids wearing these t-shirts that say, I love integration. And I was like, people who love math don't wear math t-shirts. And then I remembered that I have a math t-shirt and I'm not wearing it for this video because it's a thicker t-shirt and it's kind of hot today, but I sadly am the stereotype. Mine doesn't say I love integration, but I might get a t-shirt that says I love integration. That would be funny. So the beginning is just kind of introducing what we're going to be doing in this book. And then the book is divided into two parts. The first is gathering statistics. So that's getting the data and building samples out of this data that we gather. And part two is hunting parameters. And that's where we get into confidence, probabilities, the central limit theorem. And we actually at the very end wind up doing some hypothesis testing. So the book is divided into two sections and they flow together quite naturally. So the first part is just about sampling, how we get this data, how we measure this data, and some important things to keep in mind. Something that I think they did a really good job of is when they went through the four primary characteristics, which is here on page 53, sample size, how much data is there, shape, what does it look like, location, where is it exactly, and spread, how wide. So we have these four things, and they take one page to really clearly explain what's going on. So this is sample size, then shape. And I just felt like these pages in particular were very well done. Everything in this book felt like the first statistics class that I took, which was probably like a like 150 or 210. I don't know what the class number was, but the basic statistics class was really what was covered in this book. And I felt like these pages did a really good job of explaining those 4 characteristics. So after we get through collecting a lot of the data, we then talk about some things that we can calculate. One thing that I think is very important and that I want so many people to understand the difference about whether or not they ever touch a math book in their life is the difference between mean and median. This book, and it is discussed in the Math Cave section, avoids using the word mean, and I think that is actually a good choice because it can come across as confusing. Most people know the word average, and average is what most people think of, and that's a better word for introducing these topics to people. So they use the word average versus median, and I think understanding that an average might be skewed and can be very incorrect versus the median might be a better representation when you're looking at data is something that everyone should be very, very, very familiar with. This has come up time and time again in various math books that I have read, and I think it is so important when people hear the word average, like, oh, if the average salary in this house is, now I'm not going to do the math here, but like if the average salary is $500,000, you could have one person making $1 million and a couple people in the household earning pennies, and you can average out to $500,000, but that's not a good representation of what people in the house are earning if you're talking about household income for whatever reason. So I think understanding that difference, which is covered here, is so important. And if you take nothing else away from this book and nothing else from any math book you ever read, understanding the difference between average and median and when they should be used and that you should be looking at both is probably the most important thing for all statistics. So that's on page 61. 60 and 61 is where they get into that. And again, you see the cartoon format keeps it easy and not a lot of numbers, which is good for people who might not be very number inclined. Part 2 is hunting parameters, and that's where we get into some maybe more complicated stuff. It never really truly gets complicated. I do think that the authors did a very good job. I was very impressed about their explanation and how they talked about both p-values, confidence intervals, and hypothesis testing. I really feel like those are things that maybe are confusing at first glance for a lot of people, and I think the authors did a fantastic job covering that. I felt like it was very easy to understand. Of course, this is where mentioning my background may include, or it's worthwhile mentioning my background because I might have a bias because I already understand this material. It might just make more sense to me, but I think they did a very, very good job, especially the hypothesis testing, which I feel like on first glance, a lot of people are maybe confused about, or p-values. P-values tend to be very confusing. I remember the first time I encountered them, it took me a few go-arounds to figure out exactly what was going on. So this book, I think, did a very good job of touching those topics and explaining them in a very clear format. Finally, I thought this was funny. I have a sticky note on page 193 where we're close to the end of the book and the author says, now that we've covered the fundamentals, congratulations. If you understand how that works, you understand statistics. The rest is mostly details. Ladies and gentlemen, I took for my senior capstone in my math degree statistics with class numbers 498 and 499. It was a year long. It came with this fun book, which this thing caused me a lot of stress. Oh yes, just details. Just details. We're just in the details. No, I didn't cry in this book. Why did you ask? Just some details. They are right. It is kind of building on these basics, and understanding the basics is very important. But when they say the rest is details, the details can get quite difficult, is all I'm going to say. The details can get quite fun, quite interesting. And it is very fun to see what you can do with it. But statistics, and do not be misled, this is a great foundation, but this is not everything that there is to statistics. So if the field interests you, you can dig in quite a bit further from what is in this book. Notably, things not covered in this book is Bayes' theorem, but I think that's okay. I feel like that is definitely something that doesn't need to necessarily be covered in a Bayes statistics. I mean, I think it's interesting and intriguing, and there's a lot that can be done with it. But for someone who, or for people who are writing a book where they're intentionally trying to keep things very base level, I think it's okay that they skipped Bayes' theorem. And that's just something I wanted to note because the older version of this book, I think it was the older version of this book, did cover it. So if you are looking for that, that is not going to be in this book. I also liked that a lot of their examples were not dice rolling, which I feel like dice rolling is the classic probability example that's given a lot of the time, but they didn't do a lot of dice rolling in this book, and I kind of appreciate it because it gave a fresh new feel for the book. So if you're looking for a basic introduction to statistics, or if you want a refresher because you don't remember anything from your 10th grade class where you covered this, or whenever you last took statistics, I think this is a fun introduction, particularly if you're more math averse. Definitely check this out and let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any thoughts or comments on this book, or if you have anything else you would like to share. I would love to hear it in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.